Welcome back to the channel. Today's video we're working on this Stihl 026. It's in a box and parts and pieces here and there, but we know how to put it back together. Customer states that it won't start, so we're guessing probably the carburetor, maybe a fuel line. We'll check it out, maybe a metering diaphragm, but like I said, we'll tear it apart, check it out, get it running again. Okay, I shot a little gas down the carb. We're going to see if it starts. Okay, so you heard it start, so that tells me that there's probably a carburetor issue, fuel line, or fuel filter. We're going to dive into that now. So I went ahead and loosened the screw that's underneath the saw handle here, and you're going to lift up on that part here, and now you'll be able to disconnect your throttle linkage that goes to the carburetor. Slowly pull back on the throttle linkage, and that'll break the carburetor loose from the bolts. And if this pops out, don't worry about it. I'm going to show you how to replace that. Well, not replace it, but reinstall it later. But maybe halfway. You can look below and you can see the fuel line there. Preferably with an empty tank of gas, so fuel doesn't come out of the fuel line. You can go ahead and pry that loose with a screwdriver, and then the carburetor should slip right out. Okay, so you can see you have the carburetor on the bench now with the throttle linkage still attached. What I do recommend is if you're doing this by yourself and you can't reference a video that shows a step-by-step, because sometimes I skip little parts here and there, it's a good idea to always take pictures so you remember exactly where things go, how they were placed. So now that the carburetor is taken out, we're going to remove these 4 screws, take a look at the top, and by the looks of things there's a lot of dirt, so there could be some sitting on top of the metering diaphragm. It's dirty inside and it's not letting that work properly, so that could be the culprit. Okay, the 4 screws are removed. We're going to gently pry up on this. Pop right off. Okay. Metering diaphragm's not terrible. Still got function. It's not hard as a rock. It's still got give and take. And as I'm looking inside, it looks pretty clean. So we'll flip it on the other side and take that side off, see if there's any obstructions there. Alright, so that side looks pretty good. Nothing obstructing there. We'll pull the needle out and see if there's anything maybe plugged in there. So I pulled the needle out. That looks clear of any obstructions. So I'm going to get some thin copper wire, run it through some of these small holes, and take some carb cleaner and spray out those inlets. See if that doesn't blow anything out. So we pulled our metering diaphragm and gasket out. You can see that on camera. All that dirt buildup. That could be the reason why it's not running, because all that weight has an issue with the metering diaphragm working properly. So if we clean that off, reinstall this. So now we're going to reinstall the needle into the carburetor, and this is the difficult part, and I can't do it with one hand. Spring here goes in the center. Gently put this down into position, and then the screw gets tight back into that hole there. Next we'll reinstall the metering diaphragm. Make sure the little nub is facing down so it can hit and do its job. And we'll put the top cover on, reinstall the 4 screws. Okay, flip it around, we'll put this piece back on. As you can see, the indentation on here matches that side, so pretty easy. Flip it on, put the screw back in. Okay, if your throttle linkage popped out, looks like this. Goes right behind that little hole there, slips in, rotates, and it's going to sit just like that. Okay, now comes the tricky part. You need to slip the carburetor onto the 2 bolts, get it around the wiring, keep the fuel line underneath the carburetor, and insert this part here into this hole right here. But it can be done, and we'll do it. Here goes. After a few minutes of moving the wires around the line, down. We got the fuel line reattached, wires out of the way. Now I said we're gonna show you how to do this here. So we got the throttle linkage here. We got the trigger. And that little piece of wire here has to slip underneath this little piece right there. So we're going to line up the notches in that piece of wire and gently press down until that slips in like that. And you'll hear it kind of lock into place. Okay, from there we can squeeze our trigger down, push up, and reattach our throttle linkage into the piece that's down here. You need to keep a little finger tension on the top here as you reinstall that. It's got two little lips in the front that's going to slip over this bar here, and then you'll push it down in place without this coming apart. Turn this all upside down, reinstall the screw. That's back in. See, the throttle linkage is working properly, choke's working. Go ahead and install our air filter, and that just tightens right back up on there. And we'll want to check, well, it's going to work, but that little tab here pushes up against there and closes it off inside. So I reinstalled the top here, and that's just a threaded screw that sits on top of the engine head that's slotted out. You can tighten it on. And the back cover, it just has a couple notches that you got to line up right there. Slip it down, tighten it up. With everything put back together, I'm going to go ahead and add some fuel. Cross my fingers and hopefully it starts and runs properly again. Okay, so in the previous two clips, you could see me, I was pulling it, wouldn't start. So I went over and looked at the adjustments on the high-low screw, and they were all out of whack. So I just quickly tuned it, and now it's running properly. I'm going to wait a few minutes and start it up again just to make sure it idles properly, and I think we got it fixed. Alright, so it's been about 15 minutes. Had time to cool down. Go ahead and start this up again. So if we were diagnostic detectives, probably what happened was over time all that sawdust got up into the carburetor under the metering diaphragm, and the saw was running funky, you know, high idle, low idle, whatnot, and they couldn't get it right, and they kept trying to dial in the carburetor, and they could never get it just right because of the sawdust on top of the metering diaphragm. So that we cleaned that off, tune the carburetor again. I think this saw is going to run fine for a good while. Hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully you learned something from this video. We'll see you next time from Neighborhood Go-To Guy.